Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 16 years of law enforcement analysis experience, 14 of which is with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office in California. The guest is a great influencer of the Bay Area Crime and Intelligence Analysts Association, as well as the California Crime and Intelligence Analysis Association. He is CALIA certified with the IACA, and I had the pleasure of working with him when we worked together on Standards, Methods, and Technology Committee. He was my technology chairperson. Please welcome Matt Harris. Matt, how are we doing?
Doing great. How's it going, Jason?
Good. Man, those association names are tough to get out.
Tongue twisters for sure.
So before we get started in your career and your influence to the profession, when we were talking yesterday in the prep call, you let me know that you're actually displaced in California from your home because of the wildfires. What's the latest on your situation?
Well, we currently have a fire burning here in Sonoma County. It started over in Napa County, and they didn't really have a lot of expectation that it would make it over here, but it did. We had some wind pickup, and that wind drove the fire over into Sonoma County. I live on the perimeter of the major town here in Santa Rosa. We got notification about 9 o'clock on Sunday night that our area, the fire is starting to head our way. About an hour later, we got formal notification that they wanted us to evacuate, so we could tell the fire was moving quickly. Luckily, this isn't the first time this has happened to us, so we got all our stuff ready, woke the kids up, and then bailed out of the house and went to my in-laws. We've been there for 4 days now, 5 days, I think, and everybody's safe. The house is safe. Fire came through, burnt right up to my neighbor's property, but everything's good. And it's 5% contained. Lucky for me, that containment line is actually right behind my house. So
when you say 5% contained, what does that mean?
When a fire breaks out, they first have to try and figure out where the perimeter of it is. Once they start to get the perimeter line figured out, they identify different commands to take over that fire. Then once they get bulldozer lines in and they get the fire kind of put out to a satisfactory point where they feel like it's not going to flare up again, then that command will declare that their portion of the fire is contained and they feel safe that it's not going to flare back up. They break that perimeter out into certain percentages, and then once those areas get contained, then they can tell you what the percentage of the fire is contained.
You had mentioned that the fire is burnt all the way up to your neighbor's house. Does that mean that everything past that is just charred black? That's what I envision right now.
Yeah, that's about 90% accurate. So when a fire burns, especially a wind-driven fire, there may be certain areas that are outside of that, for whatever reason, get passed by. Mm-hmm. So there'll be things still within the 100% perimeter of the fire that aren't burnt or what have you. But for the most part, everything beyond that, inside that perimeter, is burnt.
And so you had mentioned that this isn't the first time that this has happened to you. When we talked yesterday, you'd mentioned that it's happened over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Have you evacuated every time?
I've been evacuated twice.
But back in 2017, you actually took advantage of the situation and that you used some of your analytical skills to help inform the community about the situation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So 2017 was really bad. At that time, it was the worst fire in California history. We lost 4,000 houses in that fire. Over 27 members of the sheriff's office here lost houses in that fire. So, I mean, absolutely everybody you knew was impacted by this. Now, unfortunately, there have been a couple other fires here in California that have been worse than that. But at first, I got evacuated. Again, seeing fire on the hill behind my house, it's kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to have anything when I come back. After we got the family safe, I said, okay, I need to go do something. So I just drove into work with no idea of what was going on. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I got here and most people were for the department, we're still trying to get people evacuated out of their homes. I mean, we're nearly evacuating the entire county, all in the middle of the night. At that point, the wind was blowing like 70 miles an hour. It was just driving fire like crazy, and it burnt right through the middle of our major town again here, Santa Rosa, and some of the perimeter area. At first, I was just at the sheriff's office trying to help with getting food and getting people situated and help with the deputies any way I could. And then what I later learned in the day was that deputies were coming in, they were doing evacuations and what have you, but they had no idea where the fire even was. We in the office could watch the news and see what was going on, but with our CAD system and what have you, there was no way of knowing like where exactly the fire was. So I found that the deputies on the street really needed something to say, here's the current perimeter of the fire. Here's what we know. Day one, first thing that I was able to do, probably 12 to 14 hours after having been here, kind of realizing the scope of the problem, was to get together some maps that were just real quick cut and dry screenshots of, hey, here's where the fire is currently that we know of and what's been impacted. And that was hugely helpful for the men and women out on the street trying to do the evacuations and be kind of the public face of the government at the time there for those people that were being impacted.
What was the data source?
So I've learned that you get these satellite hotspot readings of where the fire has been. And so we were able to use those hotspots to be able to see where the fire had most recently burnt. That gave us a fairly quick idea of what the perimeter of the fire was before the California fire, Cal Fire is what we call them, had been able to formally draw us a perimeter and say, here's where the fire is. We had these hotspots even before then. Now I'm much more fluent with those hotspot detection systems and have them already built in to some of my ArcGIS maps so that when something happens, I can just automatically, I'm connected to them and don't have to worry about going out and finding how to hook up and connect to these things.
Of course you did, right? Of course you've improved the process of the system. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, well, hey, I'm glad you and your family are safe. I hope that this gets resolved soon and you get back into your house and get back to somewhat normal.
Yeah, this fire here, feeling a lot more comfortable for myself personally, but also for the community. We're past the point where the wind's really driving it as of right now. One of the things that I kind of shared personally with some of my contacts on Facebook, and I had shared this through the department. I made a map for the department of like fire fatigue, and it shows the perimeters of the fires over the last 4 years and shows nearly the entire county. Not the entire county has burnt, but about, I would say, 1/3 of it. And so you can see, and it's just like, it's a real good representation of like, oh my gosh, like no wonder why we're all tired of this. It just keeps on happening, and they're so big.
Is it about the same time of year?
Yeah, usually the ones had happened before were in October and later in October, but this one started in September. So yeah, it's definitely a seasonal thing for us.
All right, let's get into your impact to the law enforcement analysis profession. You started out in the military, find your way to being a crime analyst. So talk about how you discovered crime analysis.
Yeah, great question.
How you got into the field.
When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a police officer. I thought, for sure that was what I wanted to do. And so I joined the military as a military police at the time and thought this would be a good way for me to get experience there. Then I could go to college, get a degree, and that would put me in a pretty solid position for a local law enforcement agency to want to hire me. I did get some law enforcement experience in the military police. It's a little different than civilian stuff, but fairly similar. I went to bar fights. I went to domestic violence. And so I went to, did traffic enforcement and stuff like that. So that was all a good learning experience on the ground there. Then I kind of thought, maybe I want to go more into juvenile corrections or what have you when I get out of this, because maybe that would have a bigger impact than just being I can't say just being an officer on the street, but maybe it'd have an opportunity to prepare more change or what have you. So then I went into college and was studying a lot of corrections programs or juvenile or social programs that help to kind of abate crime. What I really felt like what I was learning from the sociology studies that I was doing there felt like okay, maybe an agency gets it right or one program works well, but most of the time when it gets replicated, it just doesn't seem to work out all that well. What I really found in college, I really liked the stats courses that I took. They made sense. They were easy for me to understand. The math felt, for whatever reason, people may say I'm weird. A lot of like the stats courses, but they were easy for me. So what I was really looking for once I got past that was, how can I do this in a law enforcement setting? Is there a way that I can do that? Luckily, I went to Sacramento State University, California State University, Sacramento. They also happen to have part of their continuing education program, a California Crime Analysis certificate program. I didn't have a job coming out of college, and I wasn't quite sure where to go. Saw that program and thought, okay, perfect. I can continue my education by doing this certification while I continue to look for ways to go into work. And when I took that certification, I thought, this sounds like a really cool career path. And so that's what kind of guided me in that direction. While I was in that certification, I met an analyst, Conan Mullen, from the Santa Rosa Police Department. About 3/4 to 90% of the way through the course, he mentioned to the class, hey, my boss is leaving the Santa Rosa Police Department, which means we're going to have an opening for a crime analyst. And if anybody wants to apply, I invite you to apply. And so lo and behold, I applied for that position and I didn't get it.
No.
Because he wasn't the crime analyst at the time. He was a crime analysis technician. I was talking to the interviewers. I said, I recognize that you guys have a crime analysis technician internally that may get selected for this position. And if that's the case, I want to let you know that I'm interested in potentially filling his role if it comes up. And sure enough, that's what happened.
So what's a technician do? Crime analysis technician?
Like a records tech, but for crime analysis. And so the concept of the role was, you do data entry for the crime analyst. There's these field contact cards that we get all the time. Can you put those in data entry? There's this or that we, it's kind of more administrative work for the crime analyst. So kind of a support role for the main crime analyst. And then about a year into that job, they promoted me to a full-time crime analyst.
So then you're there a couple of years and then you move on to your current role in Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. I often ask this question when I know someone moved from a police department to a sheriff's office is, what was your experience changing from a police department to a sheriff's office?
I think the biggest thing for me was I went from a place where there were two of us and we could work together to a place where I was out on my own. And so I had to define my role. As far as the cultural difference, I didn't really, for myself, notice a large change in the work. I'm still in the same city. My office didn't move that far geographically. The work I was doing to get stuff set up in Santa Rosa, I had tried to replicate a lot of that here in the sheriff's office because they just didn't have anything to get started with. I did find that there was a different communication style within the department. Some things good, some things, not as good, but it was interesting to see differences from one department to the other.
Because you're the sole analyst, you're the jack of all trades, right? You're getting experience in all sorts of matters, whether it's data processing, whether it's administrative analysis, crime analysis, intelligence analysis, whatever the topic of the day is, so to speak, you're getting into.
Absolutely. And especially in those early days here at the sheriff's office, they weren't, I think, sure 100% how to use me, but they did know that they had more administrative needs that they wanted filled. And so, the sheriff at the time or the assistant sheriff had specific data reports that they wanted to see on a monthly or quarterly basis. And so that was kind of like the big task. Okay, I want to see these administrative reports. But once I got past that, then I had a lot of free reign of things to do on my own.
I usually ask about the badge story to my guests, and this is the career-defining moment or the career-defining case or project. With you, it seems like you couldn't decide. So you got a couple of stories for us. Let's just start with the first one, and we'll go through them all.
Yeah. I'm sorry for my indecisiveness, but these were items that had impact for the department or the detectives that I worked with. One of the first things that was a good one for me, and I was talking to the guy the other day, he's a lieutenant now, he was the property crime sergeant at the time. He's like, oh, when I teach at the academy, I always tell that story about when you solve that crime. Back in 2012, we had a string of residential burglaries happening. In that string of burglaries, a suspect would also light a fire inside the house and try and burn the house down. And he actually successfully burnt one house down, but many of the others never really took. Most of these burglaries weren't even in our jurisdiction until one happened to be in our jurisdiction, and that's when it became our case. In that case, we had a little bit to go off. The suspect had left a beer can at the scene, and it wasn't too far from a local convenience store. Our detectives went to the convenience store and sure enough, saw a guy buying that beer can, and then we had an image of the guy. I didn't do really a ton of analytical work on this case. I found the prior crimes, put them on the map. I found some known offenders that we knew at that time. The quick and easy way for me to go about that was to look at recent parolees. And sure enough, I picked a parolee that happened to live right in the center of where most of the crimes had occurred, pulled up his photo, and I thought the guy was a dead-on match. So at the time, our detectives were all out to lunch, so I just took the photo and left it sitting on the primary detective's desk. And then about 20, 30 minutes later, the detectives came back from lunch and they're like, where'd you get this? They went out to the guy's house, looked in his garage, found all the stolen property and hooked him that day.
Well, hey, you say you didn't do a lot, but it would have been very difficult for them to get to where they needed to go without your efforts. So it does seem simple, but knowledge of the programs, knowledge of the data, you got there a lot faster because of your knowledge, skills, and ability.
Maybe you can say that. I don't know.
You're being humble.
I feel like we've got fairly good tech stuff that allows us to show those kind of things. But yeah, this was also back in 2012. So things have maybe improved on that scene, but I did think it was not a lot of real analytics. I didn't do geographic profiling. I didn't do any special techniques. I just looked at the crimes, I looked at the known offenders, and then said, start going through people, and I found them fairly quickly. So
I'm glad that the surveillance photo actually rendered something recognizable.
They thought the guy was wearing a food processing, like a hairnet, because he's near a food processing plant, but I was for sure, no, that's a guy with gray hair. And sure, it was a guy with gray hair. It wasn't a hairnet.
All right. What's your next story?
In Sonoma County, we're fairly notorious for being a large marijuana growing area. Some of these other ones that I'm about to tell you, actually all three of them, revolve around marijuana sales and violent crime that happened around marijuana sales. So in 2013, we had marijuana sales deal go bad, where two suspects had come out one from New York and one from Colorado to purchase marijuana, and they had hired a third person to help package the marijuana and then transport it back to the East Coast for them, where they were going to sell it at 3 or 4 times the value of the California value. That person who they had hired to package it for them had them all down on the ground, one from Colorado, one from New York, and the person who was selling the marijuana to them all down on the ground with the special instructions he was giving them to package it. And then he executed all 3 of them by shooting head, point blank range. Then he took off with some of his cohorts that he had brought along to help drive the marijuana. And we had very little evidence to go off of who this guy was, where he came from. And so we had to try and put the pieces together. And in this case, one of the few pieces of evidence that we had at the beginning was some GPS tracks of the rental car of the victims to try and figure out where they were before they were killed. The only thing I did on this was to take those GPS tracks from that rental car, put them onto the map, convert them into a KML file so that they could be shown in Google Earth. And that made it so our detectives could share it around. Everybody could have it on their computer and work with it. Based on that information, we were able to find that the suspect and the victims had met up at a bar. We had known they met up at a bar once, But what we were able to find based on the GPS tracks were that they had actually gone to the bar a second time. When they were there at the bar the second time, we actually, again, got good surveillance imagery of our suspect and the vehicle he was driving. Once we had that, we had something to go on. We put those leads together, did some really good detective work, and a couple weeks later, we had the guy in custody.
So why kill everybody?
Because then he got the marijuana and the money, so he didn't have to pay for it.
How much money are we talking about in marijuana? You remember?
Really, for the rest of your life in prison, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the purchase price of the marijuana was probably $200,000 or $300,000, and then the resale value back outside of California was probably quite a bit higher. Maybe made as much as $500,000 to $700,000 on the whole deal. But so the suspect in that case had a bit of a gambling problem, so I think he was in need for some cash.
That's an interesting story. Even with the KML, I mean, getting that together and being able to get it to everybody. I mean, again, you're telling me you just did this, but that's a skill that not everybody knows how to do. And in that case, you, again, facilitated the situation to bring about the case being solved faster than I think it normally would have had you not been able to do that.
And that was one of those things. I used that ESRI to take something from the map and export it to KML. And I really liked that at the time. There were several different analytical projects that I was working on. And I found that it just made it super easy to share mapping data with the detectives. They don't have to have any special program on their computer or anything like that. During that time range, I was using a lot of that to share maps with the detectives.
All right. And then you got another one.
So, yeah, in 2016, we again had a marijuana sale issue go bad. Again, we had people from the East Coast coming out here to purchase. And then again, during the transaction, something went wrong. The purchaser ended up shooting and killing two of the people that were there to sell, shooting another one in the face, but she survived. So we had a near second triple homicide. In this case, it was a double homicide. Again, that time the suspect basically walked away from Sonoma County with very little trace of evidence of who he was or where he came from. They'd used a burner phone for all of the transactions with our victims, so we had very little info to go on from that phone. We ended up getting a photo from one of our toll bridges here going across the San Francisco Bay. In that photo, we saw our suspect and a white what we presume to be a Hyundai Elantra. In this case, I did have to do a little bit more tech work. What we got was 4 PDF documents from the California State DMV. All of the Hyundai Elantras registered in California of model year 2015 through 2017. Each of those 4 PDF documents was over 1,000 pages long and had data inside them that wasn't particularly well structured. It was tab delimited with word wrapping. So if you can imagine, the words were kind of all over the page. They weren't necessarily in a nice clean format where you could export from PDF to text and then it was all going to be nice and clean with the tabs would always line up in the same place or what have you. The detectives had been sitting on that data for a couple of days because I was gone to training and couldn't get anything done with it. And I was able to take that PDF document, convert it into text, and then start to begin to parse it out to where I got it into a clean format. I was able to do that within the first day of coming back. I went in their office to say, here it is. They were like, what? How did you do that? And I just looked at him and kind of like dropped the mic moment and said, magic. That earned me a nickname that I have here in the department with some of the detectives to this day. The other ones, it's been since 2016, so it's a little forgotten. But
yeah, so you're the magic man now. Some. So I guess in all seriousness though, like, so if you have this data, some of it's tab delimited, but you have these hard returns, these word wrappings, sometimes randomly throughout the data. How did you clean the data?
Just a lot of find and replace, or a little bit of time I use TextPad rather than Notepad. kind of text editors that are better, give you a little bit more flexibility. So with doing stuff like with regular expressions or whatever, I could find where there were certain line breaks that then had the next line that looked with letters or something like that. A bunch of find and replace, so I got them to line up most exactly as I wanted them. Change it into comma separated data and then import it into Excel. That allowed us to start really leveraging the next steps, which was to start looking up all of those license plates against our license plate reader data to try and find, okay, now of all these thousands or hundreds of thousands of Hyundai Elantras, which ones are white, because we can see that they've been, hit a license plate reader between here and where our suspect started, the areas where we know that they traveled during the time range of the event.
All right. At this time, is the license plate reader solely police car traveling around the city, or did you have stationary license plate readers?
We don't have them here, Sonoma Sheriff. We don't have them, or even very many of them here in Sonoma County, but we have access to license plate reader data through our regional fusion center. And since our suspect had traveled along some major freeways between here and Sacramento, also San Francisco, we were kind of looking at quite a large area of plate readers and data. So needless to say, I was looking at a lot of cars for several days, but had some help from an analyst here in the region, Jillian Goshen. She works with the San Rafael Police Department. She did some really good help processing some of my data in batch through one of the major vendors, Vigilant, for their license plate reader.
So then how much time between you starting to work to clean the data to when you actually identified the person?
Oh, good question. Well, I know the homicides happened while I was gone in a training. And I would say it was within a week, maybe 10 days, once we finally got the hit. So there were definitely several days there where I was just doing nothing but running plates through the plate reader system and looking at images and, eliminating vehicles or, looking at vehicles to further follow up on.
And then why did this one go bad? Again, why shoot?
I don't know what happened.
Interesting. Now, and do you have a lot of people coming from the East Coast over to your neck of the woods for drug dealing? I mean, it's
not uncommon.
Okay. One other follow-up question before we move on is, do you have a lot of grows, marijuana?
Oh, yeah.
Grows? That's what's all from? Okay. That's
yeah.
what I thought.
There's an area of California called the Emerald Triangle. And on, I don't know if it's cable or if it's on Netflix or what it is about, what goes on up there. But that's a little bit north of us. But the one thing that I think makes us a little bit more susceptible to some of this is we're the largest urban area closest to that region. And so we've got a small regional airport, got a decent medical marijuana industry going here, or other businesses. And so I think since we have the population here, it's where we see a lot of the transactions occurring.
Well, good. All right. So let's take a quick break before we get to your last story there. We'll finish up that last story, and then I want to talk some technology with you coming out of the break. This is Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hey there, everybody. This is Albert Mesa, and I'm here to ask you a very important question. Have you ever done a sit-along with the dispatcher? If the answer is no, and you're currently an analyst, you're missing out on a huge piece of the data puzzle. Not only will you open your eyes to how data is captured, entered, and coded, you'll see how calls are prioritized and dispatched and get a true feel for CAD data. You'll get to see it in a whole new light and use it as a tool in your analysis. And who doesn't want to sit with a true first responder who probably saved a life right before they sat with you?
This is Steve Gottlieb saying, never let failure get to your heart and never let success go to your head. Always stay humble because humility wears well.
Welcome back. Before the break, Matt Harris was telling us his bad stories, the ones where he didn't do very much, quote unquote, to solve the case. But as you heard, otherwise, he was influential in help solving each one of those cases. So you had one more that you wanted to talk about, and this is a more recent case that you just starting to finish up on. So let's get into that.
Yeah, it's a series of cases that had happened between 2017 and 2018. They're again marijuana related and again related to suspects coming from the East Coast.
I sense a theme.
Yeah. And violence happening in the course of either those purchases. And actually, in this case, they weren't coming with intent to purchase. They were coming with intent to rob. So these people were coming to commit home invasion robberies and then go back. Again, the interesting thing that happened here was several cases had happened that weren't ours, Sonoma Sheriff. They were Santa Rosa PD's. And then, sure enough, in February of 2018, we got 2 cases in the same day. One of those cases was a home invasion robbery that included a homicide. So we ended up with a total of 6 different robberies and the 7th one being the homicide. And so in each of these cases, we had multiple suspects that had come from the East Coast. Shortly after getting into our case, we had realized that those people that had come from the East Coast were in contact with a phone number that was showing in California having ping results in the area of one of our state prisons. We did a little further looking into some of the cases that had happened with Santa Rosa, and we realized that what was happening is these robberies were being coordinated by a suspect who was in state prison.
Oh, wow.
Really amazing. Come to find out that the suspects that were all coming from the East Coast were all in contact with a person who was in either state or federal prison on the East Coast. I want to say it was probably state prison. So we had 2 different suspects in contact with each other, both in custody, conducting home invasion robberies with suspects from across the country, stealing marijuana and then taking it back to the East Coast for sales. In the course of this investigation, we ended up having 30 different suspects who were involved in various aspects of this crime, whether that be getting phones to people in custody or getting firearms to people who were coming out to commit the crimes, or purchasing airplane tickets, organizing for the shipment of the marijuana to be shipped back to the East Coast. In this case, they were using actual carrier, such as FedEx or UPS. And so it turned out to be this really major case, and something I think none of us were really prepared to realize what we were getting into when those first 2 cases came into our office. For me, it became just a super analytical challenge. We had 23 different cell phones. Of those cell phones, I had probably 30 to 40 different sources of phone records for those phones. So I might have a Celebrite download and historical phone records. I might have data from a cell phone tower dump. I might have data from a live ping on phones. And so I just had so many different sources of data for all of those phones. We ended up with, in that particular set of phone records, 130,000 individual call detail records, over 2,100 different phone contacts of people, names inside of those phones. And keep in mind, that it wasn't like 23 phones from 23 people. It might have been 23 phones from like 10 or 15. Because
you mean they have more than one phone?
Yeah, well, especially our guys that are in custody, they had as many as 10 different phones, and I wouldn't have phone records for all of those phones. And what got really cool was at the point when I had so many phone records, even if I didn't have your records for phone number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I could tell from all the other people that I had records for a little snippet of who was in contact with that phone, so I could almost reverse engineer a subset of phone records for that particular phone, even if I didn't have them. So it became a real particular challenge just getting those records into a unique format where I could use them, getting them to be able to do call frequency analysis.
What are you using to keep all the data together?
Yeah, so at first it was a combination of the GeoTime product. After years of doing this stuff on my own, came and fell to love with, because the GeoTime product allows you to export your data into an Excel format, and they call it their compact file. It gives you a really nice, clean set of phone records, and doesn't matter who your carrier is. All carriers, all different types of phone records get exported into this same format. It makes it nice and easy for the detectives to read. It standardizes everything for you from there. And so once I had them standardized into that GeoTime compact format, then I could take the data and do some different call frequencies, do some cleanup of the contacts, and start, like I was saying, reverse engineering some of those phone records for people that I didn't have. The other thing is the GeoTime team, Curtis, and some of the engineers he's got working over there, Ryan von Spronson, was super helpful. They actually changed their product in almost near real time for some of the problems that we were having trying to get all of these phone records into a nice standardized format for us. I can't thank
Was it
them
just
enough.
what were some of the issues that they were able to solve so quickly?
Well, some of the stuff I think that they solved immediately was more of like the cell phone formatting issues. Other things, since this has become, more of a federal case, as you can imagine, with, people traveling across state lines and everything, and all of the conspiracy that's going on, is taking a while to process. And so in less of real time, but more, planned out, they've adjusted their product on the enterprise level, which is what some of the fusion centers or the larger police agencies, maybe even the FBI or what have you, who are doing more federal cases or stuff like this, for handling large organized events where they have so many different phone records. And so the way they process several different records with several contacts, they completely reformatted stuff there based on some of the stuff that we needed to have happen for this case.
So how did the case get resolved?
Well, really lucky that I work for a great agency, and we had quite a bit of luck on our side, but also some really great detective work. And in many of those cases, especially the latter ones that were ours, we were able to get the suspects in custody the same day that the crime occurred. Many of those suspects we actually caught on their way or at the airport. So the fact that our deputies and our detectives on the street were able to identify who these people were and wrap them up on the same day was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Did you have the locations of the phone? Is that what you used?
Some of it was based on phone location. Some of it was based on finding information from rental cars. Some of it was just based on pure, okay, this has happened. I'm going to the airport and I'm going to sit there and see what I find. Now, the stuff that for the organizers and everything on the federal level, that case is still ongoing. Since the people were in custody already, it was handled a little differently.
So is this a situation of different gang members stealing each other's product?
Well, it was definitely gang related. It was for earning money for the gang. And so we had one of the guy on the West Coast here as leader of one gang, guy on the East Coast, again, leader of another gang. And so that's how they were getting their operatives, right? And so they had enough control of those people on the streets to say, hey, I want you to go do this for me. And, each player just did a little role. And then sure enough, next thing you know, you've got the whole organization working to bring people across the country, give them weapons, go and do a home invasion.
Quid pro quo.
Yeah. But so, yeah, in this case, I did a ton of work. I did a link chart. I've got everybody organized on a nice, massive link chart that our guys have hanging in the office. I did the cell phone analysis. I have these pages and pages and pages of cell phone analysis. But in the end, it didn't wrap up in something where I get to go testify in court. I didn't solve anything, or it's still ongoing at the federal level, and they have federal analysts looking at the data that we provided them. It's not something that I can say, oh, I made a name for myself on this big, huge case, but it was a massive amount of analytical work. I mean, months on this.
That's a lot of data, a lot of work, and to be summarized and to be put in a format and a product that could be easily consumed. So good job, Matt. So is there any lessons learned that came out of this case that you haven't already addressed?
The biggest thing for me was do anything that I possibly could to try and get data. Be very careful when you're importing data. Be very careful of how you know that data is processed and how you structure it, because when you're 20 steps down the line and then all of a sudden something comes into question, you've got to be able to walk back to say, okay, I know this is accurate because I did steps A, B, and C to get here. With some of these software products, it's real easy to put the data in and then get a result, but you got to be very meticulous. Make sure you cross-check everything as you are going through it and have a decent way of documenting that, because when it comes time, a couple weeks down the line, a couple years down the line, when you're going to court or when you need to explain something to a detective, that you can be sure of the data that you're presenting, because once it gets so convoluted and so complex, you're going to be lost, because there's just so much, you just get buried in it.
Let's move on. I want to talk about improving data processes with you. And because I know, being the sole analyst there at the sheriff's office, you've had to create data processes to free up your time to be able to work on other cases or other projects. Talk a little bit about that, because data management sometimes is innate to the crime analysis and intelligence analysis job, but a lot of people, I think, don't have the knack, so to speak, to do all the technical work.
Yeah, it gets real, and for lack of a better term, it gets real hairy real quick when you start trying to dig into data and find how it links together and put the pieces together. I haven't found that a lot of these systems come with very clear mapping or instruction as to, oh, if you want this information, go look here. You really have to be a detective to kind of start hunting things out and figuring out how stuff is structured. But it's something that I have a little bit of a knack for, and I've always had a strong desire for, because my thought has been, as a lone analyst, or even if I were, a team of 10 or 20, I don't necessarily want to be spending all of my time looking for how many burglaries we had last week in this beat, or how many homeless related incidents did we have last year over this time frame. I want a lot of that stuff to be accessible to everybody in the department. It shouldn't be stored away and stuck in some silo that only a couple people can get to. And so when I started at Santa Rosa Police Department, they had an idea that they wanted to go to more of a CompStat style model at the time, back in 2004, 2005, that was pretty popular still. And so they had asked the crime analysis unit at the time that we build out reports that help them get to something that's more CompStat-y. They can see what happened every week or
CompStat-y.
Huh?
Did you say CompStat-y?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that a thing?
I don't know, but it is now. We're going to trademark it.
Yeah, to CompStat-y. So we built out all these reports in it. Some of our line level officers there at Santa Rosa are like, oh, this is great. I can finally see what happened in my beat over the last week. I haven't been able to see that for years now. We used to have this back in the 90s. Why did it take us so long to get this back? I just really started working on automating data and getting it back to people in a digestible format. At that time, I used Microsoft Access.
Now, they don't have access in the cars or on the phone, so what were they using to view the data?
Yeah, I didn't even have a server at the time. I just had an additional computer that I was able to convince the IT department to give me a second computer, and it was my reporting computer. And so I set it up with Microsoft Access on it and learned how to build scheduled tasks. And I would set these scheduled tasks to run. And then I had kind of made somewhat friends with the IT person there at the police department at the time. He also showed me how to use some kind of spamware software that would allow me to send out automated emails, a way of creating automated reports that would come out of Access and then get emailed to all of the people in the department. That's how I got started in providing information to people.
Because you would eventually get into building websites and intranets as well, correct?
Yeah, so the tech folk are not ever too happy when they hear you're using Microsoft Access to build a report for something. I think some of that is valid, especially when you have all these files that start getting shared all over the network and they're in different places. And it does also become a little bit of a support kind of nightmare for the tech people who have to say, oh, now we need to refix this ODVC connection or this or that or what. So as I transitioned to the sheriff's office, the tech manager here had pointed out that he had seen a presentation from somebody with the same CAD system as ours on how to easily make a website that shows data based out of our CAD system. And so he and I had worked through some of the setup. That person had provided it to us in a PowerPoint. And then next thing you know, I was able to get some small amount of data onto an HTML page out of our CAD system. At the time I worked for the IT department. I've since moved to where I report to the investigations lieutenant, but at the time the IT manager was my supervisor.
Oh, okay. So you were stationed with IT doing all this stuff. Okay. I was the same way at Cincinnati Police Department. So there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to working directly with IT, but that one of them is you have access to the data, right?
Absolutely. You're spot on. There were some advantages that I got from working in the IT department for a year and a half or so while I was down there, that I kind of learned the inner workings of how they operate and was able to curry some favor with some people down there and get some stuff fast tracked to get myself better information. Eventually, I'm really glad that I've moved upstairs to the investigation section, but I can't discount how beneficial it was to be down there.
Were you classically trained in either programming or HTML writing, or is this just stuff that you've picked up as the need came about?
Yeah, on the job training for the most. I did take a couple tech courses in college, but very limited, mostly like 101 type introduction to computer courses, nothing significant.
That's impressive.
So once I got that first kind of website stood up, it was to the benefit of my manager, the IT manager at the time, because then they could find out what the usernames were of all the people in the CAD system. So when they were creating new usernames for Windows, they would not, use one that was already used in the CAD system. But it quickly turned from that for me into pulling crime data. What I was able to do for myself was I needed a way to make it easier for myself to find out what was going on the street. So I started slowly building out reports in this HTML web page environment that would allow me to see the current arrests or the current incidents that had happened or the current calls for service. And I could have quick and easy access to the data. I found when I was in our records management system that the one we had at the time was very tab driven. You'd have the narrative on one page, and then you'd have the offenses on another page, and you'd have the people involved on another page. In order to review one report, you were going through like 5-6 different pages of information, and it was very clicky and you got lost. And so I, in a very selfish way, built these tools for myself to start reviewing data. I got it to the point where I was like, comfortable with sharing them with other people. And then, so I first shared it with some of the other crime analysts in the consortium we're part of with 8 other law enforcement agencies. And so when I shared these reports with the other analysts, they started asking for other different things to change, and it slowly evolved. And it's been, I'd say, a good 12 years now of web development to the point where this is now a website that's used by all law enforcement throughout the whole county, and not just the detectives or the analysts or the records personnel use it. It's also used in the dispatch centers while our officers are out on the street. And it doesn't just contain anymore just the RMS data. We found the way to bring in data from other systems such as a state parole or our probation or sex and arson registry. And so I've slowly I have a friend, Nicole Freeman. She works now as the manager for the Oakland Police Department, but she would always give me a bad time because the way I would be by using the thin end of the wedge. And I would just ask for a little bit. And then, a little bit later, I'd ask for just a little bit. These things would keep growing until they turn into these real kind of things. And so that's how this project has developed for me here at the sheriff's office, and also shared with the law enforcement consortium that we're a part of.
So do you have a lot of parameters, a lot of search capabilities? How do you make sure that you don't have reports that are no longer being used? How are you managing the site?
Yeah, I mean, so along with it, there have been some growing pains. We had some people were using this site to search for themselves or other things that they kind of felt weren't getting audited because they weren't doing it in the live system. Luckily, I did build in some auditing parameters ahead of some of those things happenings. Also had to build in some functions to help identify when people were having errors or when the site was failing, because sometimes things would break just because systems get changed or upgraded or this or that or whatever. And so also building in some of the auditing helped to improve performance, because I could then tell how long it was taking for one of the searches to return. Again, kind of similar thought of or process of kind of a little bit at a time, not trying to take off one whole thing at once, was just do a little bit and get it built out. So yeah, it has a full auditing capability that can tell everything that's happened within it, how long it's happened, and also all of the errors that go on in the system.
Well, you mentioned the RMS and the Public Safety Consortium, which I want to get into next. I think this is a unique situation. I have not heard of a situation similar to this. I don't know if you know how rare this is. Talk about the consortium, RMS, and then go into, because you recently switched RMS vendors.
Yeah, it was a major changeover, and I volunteered myself to be one of the core team of people doing it, which looking back, I would guess I would probably volunteer again, but it might be a little bit more reluctant. But yeah, so we are one agency of a total of 9 law enforcement agencies. 2 of those are contract cities for us, but they still have some independence from the sheriff's office that share the same records management system and CAD system. In addition to the law enforcement agencies, we also have about 40 plus fire and EMS agencies that use the CAD side of the program. All of this came about back in the late 90s, early 2000s. They finally went live with it in late 2002, early 2003, before I was even hired at the Santa Rosa Police Department. The reason for all the agencies getting together in this consortium was really tragic. In the mid to late 90s, a girl in Petaluma by the name of Polly Class was kidnapped and later killed. During the course of her kidnapping, one of our deputies had pulled over the killer, the suspect, for a traffic violation. At the time, our deputy was unaware because we had missed a BOLO, be on the lookout notification for the suspect. And so because we missed that be on the lookout notification, we did not realize that suspect was wanted for the kidnapping of this girl, who was potentially in the trunk of his car at the time of he was pulled over. And so based out of that and a lot of the grants that were coming out in the late 90s, we were able to take that grant money and pull it together to improve communication between law enforcement agencies here in Sonoma County. And so the goal was to get everybody on the same CAD system and the same report writing system to really improve efficiency of how we work and talk with each other. We've taken the spirit of that really since that investigation all the way through to today. There are other law enforcement consortiums out there. I think we are, somewhat unique in the fact that of how we work together and share information. It also does allow us to have a lot of redundancy. Like, say, for example, if our dispatch center goes down, we can just jump right on to Santa Rosa Police Department's dispatch center, or they can jump on ours, vice versa. Similar stuff with when we're sharing data or crime reports through the records management system. We don't necessarily need to get approval or, request a report from another agency. We can actually even see reports while they're being written by the other departments. So it really has allowed us to see more information and be aware of things that are going on a countywide level.
And then you just recently went through a new RMS transfer over there. So we'll talk a little bit about those growing pains. I know you're probably still going through them.
Yeah, so we've been live on our new RMS for about 5 weeks now, and it's definitely still growing pains. We're learning how to use it. I feel, though, fairly happy with the change, and I heard from one of our deputies the other day that he's heard, which sounds really amazing to me. He thinks the feedback is about 80% positive from the guy on the street. And to hear something like that just kind of blows me out of the water, because I would expect by default you would just automatically hear about 80% negative. Never arrest of a deputy or an officer on the street. So I feel like that is going fairly well. There are definitely some issues that we're trying to work through, and they are pain points for some people that are experiencing them. But my goal with switching the RMS was to get a better data entry interface. That was one of the goals. The second one was to get better output reports. But back to the first one of better data entry is I really feel is if an officer or a deputy has a better interface that they're putting data into, you're going to get better quality data out of the system. If it's completely clear what that data entry field means and what information needs to be in there, even if it is free text, then you can get better information out of it. Obviously, it does help to have those things like the drop downs or the multi-selects or things like that help pull data in. But even just the simple things of having all the stuff that pertains to one particular item on the same page, so you don't have to look 3 pages deep to find it, or by the way, don't forget to click on this button because it's over there. And so just kind of a nice clear setup for better data entry to get better data, cleaner data on the backside is really one of my first big goals. The other goal that I had going into the new RMS was to increase the number of outputs that we're able to have the officers get out of one report, and therefore they're spending less time writing a report. It's kind of selfish for me as well as the analyst is if I feel like the officer's spending less time getting the report written, I'm a little more optimistic that they're going to spend a little bit more time making sure they do the report correctly. If they've got a list of 30 things to do, and on that list of 30 things to do happens to be writing the suspect's name 20 times, entry systems or handwritten on forms, they're going to just get fatigued of the whole thing. Yeah. And so if we can make it so that they reduce the number of things they have to do, then again, going to hopefully get better data quality as a bit of that. They're going to make sure they update the height or the weight or the address or the phone number of the suspect because they only have to do it in one spot. And so to that end, I feel like we're slowly moving that direction. I think over the years, as we continue to implement and improve this system, that's going to improve. But I feel like this system that we have now is going to allow for that, whereas the system we previously had just wasn't evolving. And so I'm pretty excited.
So what about your legacy data? Is that in a data warehouse now, or how are you bringing together legacy with current data?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really great question, because prior to going into this, I had heard 2 different schools of thinking. There's I'm going to bring my data into the new RMS and I'm going to try and get it as clean as I can, or I'm going to not bring it in at all. And it's just going to be in, my data warehouse or what have you. And if I want to access that data, it's in the data warehouse, then I have it going forward. Well, we actually tried to do basically both. You leave it to me, right? So one of my main roles on the RMS project was data conversion and trying to get all the data cleaned and fit into the system correctly. We, I think, did a fairly successful job of doing that. We were, unfortunate for us, faced a couple constrictions that we weren't able to overcome. And some of that is based on the new product doesn't have a place to put the data, or just the fact that when we contracted for converting the data, the vendor hasn't done a comprehensive data conversion where every single item from your old system comes into every single item from your new system, where there's kind of like, nope, these are the standard fields that we bring in. And if you want anything more than that, you're going to have to pay extra kind of thing. And so we ran into a couple limitations on bringing data in, whether they be technical or just, time or money. I'm really glad that we brought it in the end, because what I've learned since kind of going live is that you really do rely on your old data in your new system, not just your master name records. I would say by default, you should always do your best to try and bring your master name records in, especially if they're at all clean. But the legacy crime reports and dispatch events I found to be useful as well, because we're constantly writing supplemental reports, whether that be an old investigation, a cold case, or an active investigation, or this or that or whatever. And if you have those cases only in a data warehouse or what have you, the amount of time, for years moving forward that either your detectives or your records personnel will need to spend kind of bringing in at least a shell of that prior case, whether it be a copy of a PDF or something that they can use to go off. It's just a whole lot of additional staff time that your agency is going to end up paying for in the long run, which maybe you could have, paid for as part of the RMS conversion or what have you.
So you went from Intergraph to Central Square. Were both of them formatted very similar? I mean, they probably both had a name file and all these different files that you were talking about. How difficult was the conversion in your estimate?
Well, that's the other thing. One of the things about the data conversion that we were a little unprepared for is that it really relied on our local staff here to do a lot of the conversion work. Now, vendors will do this differently, but the vendor we have, Central Square, they provide us a data template, and they basically say, here's the template. You take your data and put it into this template, and then we'll take that and put it into the RMS system.
So they're kind of mapping the different fields?
They already have their template mapped to basically kind of do a dump into their system, but we have to get our data mapped into their template and then just map it into their template, but also populate the template database with our data.
Oh, wow.
So it was quite a bit of work on our side. And so that's something that definitely recommend anybody going through this process to make sure you're 100% clear with the vendor who's doing what level of work, because that was something that was a little bit of a point of maybe confusion or miscommunication during our contract negotiations. Anyhow, trying to get that data in correctly, and we had 4 different renditions of populating that template into the live system to kind of test it ahead of time.
Man, I could talk probably another hour about this, but I actually want to move on to your work with the local associations there in California, because you've been very influential to these associations. And I think California is unique. They have one large state association, the California Crime and Intelligence Analysts Association. And then underneath that is 6 associations that are underneath the umbrella of the California State Association. Why do you think California has been able to establish this, just basically this umbrella, when a lot of other states, I mean, they're lucky to have one regional association?
And that's a really good question. I don't know that I can provide a good answer to that, other than I think we did have some really strong leaders in the state back in the early 80s when the California Crime Analyst Association was founded, and when some of the California certification work was done. People like Steve Gottlieb and Phoebe Kelso and Brian Gray helped to get things set up here in California. So those 3 being from Southern California, I think may have realized that the state is a really large area. At the time, there were probably fewer analysts. And so to have a Southern California association, but not a California State Association, may have been less feasible because just the raw number of people. So I think for us, it really benefits us because we don't have to geographically travel too far if we're to meet in person to get to our regional association. But then we also have the state umbrella that allows us to get together on an annual basis, to come together for an annual conference to talk about California state-specific things beyond just the IACA conference. We are in a unique position because of the size of our state and the sheer number of analysts that we have. Back when I was the president, at the time I knew there were over 400 members in California alone. I would imagine that's probably north of 5, probably 100 easily by now. It just keeps growing. And so
you had a great vision years ago. The way you mentioned the state conference that you have every year. When you were president of the Bay Area Regional Association, you had the idea to change the course of the way things were done. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the issue was and how you resolved it?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you giving me the credit, but I think it was not just me, but other members of the state board at the time. And what we found was that the state board, we felt like wasn't really accomplishing a lot for the members of the state associations and of the regional associations. It was just kind of there, and we were paying an amount of dues to the state association. We weren't sure what it was doing. And the trouble we had was the state board at the time was made up of all of the presidents of the regional associations. And as the president of the regional association, I'm planning the state conference, I'm planning annual Christmas gathering. I'm trying to get our website set up. I'm trying to get regular trainings or monthly meetings set up. And by the time I was done with the regional association business, I was exhausted. It took enough of my time in addition to my regular work schedule. I didn't have time to spend additional time focusing on what the needs of the state association were. And it wasn't just me that had felt that way. And I'm not talking about, any old slackers. The people that were the presidents of these associations were some of the leaders in the state at the time of crime analysis. We finally had this just realization of like the state associations should be able to better, meet the needs of our members, whether that's putting on trainings or actually purchasing equipment that we could use at our annual training conference and reuse it, such as projectors or this or that or other. Because when you go to the training conference, you end up spending outrageous amounts of money to rent things as simple as a projector or a computer. And so we felt like we could really benefit the regional associations by having a little bit more organization. So what we did was we all agreed to taking the state board away from regional presidents and making it more of an independent board, allowing the elections of that independent board to have the members on for a 3-year term rather than just a 1-year term. So you could be president for 3 years, long enough to actually accomplish something rather than you just got president, you're trying to figure out how the budget works, how everything goes. You got to give it up. And so we gave them a little bit more longevity on their term on the board and what position they were in. A lot of that work happened back in 2014, but it's slowly, the state association here in California is really starting to become much more formalized in its level of ability to assist the local associations and have a little bit of authority.
I think it's a nice solution to the issue that you're having. In terms of either any of the associations, is there a current issue that you see now that, and maybe a resolution or a solution to that issue that you can think of?
Well, there's 2 things that I'm excited that have happened since I've no longer the president of the Bay Area Association. Even within our own regional association, we're having sub-regional meetings. So the Bay Area of California is a decent chunk of land. It'd take me 3 or 4 hours to get to the other side, and through traffic and different geographic hurdles to get across, including a large body of water in the middle of us. But they've instituted these sub-regional meetings. So the South Bay, the North Bay, the East Bay, we all have our own meetings instead of, going for one Bay Area meeting once a month.
Oh, okay.
The analysts have found it more helpful. And so a North Bay analyst can go to an East Bay meeting, no problem. And there's just like crimes will occur from the North Bay to the East Bay or what have you. But it really has allowed more flexibility and more like specified kind of data sharing. When we've had those meetings, it's been helpful. The other thing that more of suits your question, which was what is a hurdle that these associations are facing? And that is, how do we share data using technology? It's something that we've wanted to do in our association for a long time, but just quite haven't found the right tool to do it. And so we're working on a couple different platforms. One that we purchased as a regional association. We actually went out and purchased some software, and we're standing that up with the hopes that our analysts will actually go in and maybe put case information into this data sharing platform and use it to work cases when they involve multiple jurisdictions.
Good. That's a good
The
idea.
other thing that just by coincidence has happened at the same time is the Regional Fusion Center has stood something up that's very similar. That's going to end up being a product that the local law enforcement agencies are going to have to pay for. So it may have, some better things or maybe not. And it may have some limitations because of those people who decide to pay to play or not. And so we have these 2 things kind of bearing out with each other as what's going to be the best option. And I'm pretty excited to see how that works out. So data sharing has been a huge challenge for associations, and I think we're getting close to something that might solve it.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's finish up with your personal interests. You own a 1966 Ford Galaxie. So talk a little bit about that project and the state it's in today.
Yeah, so the state it's in today, I like to call it my Galaxie 3.0. It's a Ford Galaxie 500. It is the third one that I've had, and so I call it 3.0, but it's all been variations of the car that I originally got when I was 15. When I was 15, I went to my great-grandmother's house with my father and my grandfather. I didn't know what we were getting into, but they went to pull this car out of my grandma's garage, and when they did, Grandpa went to start it up, and he had, pumped on the gas a little bit and then turned the key. Little did he know or what have you, but when he pumped on the gas, it broke the spring to the carburetor. So it left the fuel at the floor. It left the pedal on the floor.
Oh, wow.
Car fired up, and next thing you know, it was just this big loud roar of the car and the fan and what have you, just blowing dust everywhere. So that was the first experience I had of seeing this 1968 Ford Galaxie at the time. So then it sat in our yard for a little while. As I grew older, that was like, I probably saw it when I was 13 or 14, and then when I was 15, I kind of started to take ownership of it. I took some auto shop classes in high school and learned how to work on the motor, and convinced my brother and my dad that I was going to rebuild the engine. So I did that, got the car rebuilt, drove it for a while, went into the military, saved up some money while I was in the military. I got the car painted, did some more mechanical work to the engine, put disc brakes on the front of it. About the time I was getting ready to transition duty stations from Colorado to Korea, I was rear-ended in that car, and
Oh, no.
I was pushed into the car in front of me. So the back and the front of that car was smashed after I had gotten it painted and all this other stuff. And so it's really kind of a bummer, Grandma's car got smashed up. So then I got Galaxie 2.0, and shortly before I changed duty stations to Korea, I took all of the mechanical parts that I could from that original 1968 Ford that was my grandmother's and the stuff that I put onto it, and transferred it onto this 1966 Ford, that everything that I could, and kept the best parts of both cars that I could.
Cool.
So unfortunately, that car came from Montana. So it had some major rust issues and other stuff. And so when I got back out of Korea, ended up doing a motor rebuild again, I needed another body. And so I went to one of the drier areas of California near a town called Fresno, and I found this car that was a second owner of the vehicle. It was in decent shape, but it wasn't great. And so I felt like it was a good candidate. And so I had convinced my wife before we had kids. I said, you got to let me do this before we have kids, because if I don't do it now, I'm going to have to sell the car and I'll never have like my childhood dream.
Well, since you put it that way.
Yeah, right. I've heard too many stories of my dad's friends and what have you who had these super cool cars from the 60s, these hot rods that they had to get rid of because they got married and had kids. And so I wasn't going to let that happen. And luckily my wife was on board. And so I went and got that car and did my final engine rebuild and got the car painted up nicely, keep it stored in the garage. And to bring this thing full circle, every time I evacuate, I drive the car out of it.
Well, the most prized possessions, right?
Yep.
Oh, man. Obviously, you're not dealing with any of the electronics that you have in today's car, right?
Yeah, quite a bit. I've added electronic ignition and what have you, but yeah, for the most part, it's a very functional thing. And oddly enough, I find that all of the computer programming work that I've done and the mechanical work that I've done on the car is just a very similar process of elimination, of trying to figure out how something works and fix it or make it right.
Trial and error, tediously, attention to detail.
And patience.
There you go. That's the recipe. All right. Well, very good, Matt. Well, we leave every guest with words to the world, and this is where you can promote any idea that you want to, Matt. What are your words to the world?
My words to the world are that you never know what life's going to throw at you, whether it be personally or as part of your work as a crime analyst. And that's one thing I love about my job as a crime analyst is I can come in one day thinking I'm going to work on the RMS project, and a detective walks into my office with the biggest case I've ever worked on. Or one day I think, oh, my wife is done with harvest in the wine industry, and so now we're going to be able to have each other together weekends and have fun and relax. And sure enough, nope, we're getting evacuated because of a fire, and we're thrown into a whole nother set of chaos. And so You never know what life's going to bring you. Try and take it all in stride and make the most of what you have.
Good advice. Well, I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later, but I do appreciate your time here today, Matt. Thank you so much for being on the show, and you be safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA Podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.